Good evening, everyone. I am David Liebman, jazz saxophonist. You just saw me with the soprano saxophone performing, composer and music educator. And I welcome you to this talk, which I call Seeing the Light. I want to start off with a question for all of you. Do you recall in your life when a momentous event occurred that altered the direction of your life, either immediately or possibly over time? And when you recall that event, do you feel that the implications that were suggested by the event were played out? Its denouement was complete. I'll get back to that a little bit later. But one aspect of what I'm talking about I will refer to as an epiphany, and I do not mean that, of course, in the religious sense that may happen for some of you or for anybody, but in the secular sense of the word. And I have a definition here from the Webster Dictionary of an epiphany. Usually sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature or meaning of something. An intuitive grasp of reality through something, usually simple and striking, an illuminating discovery, realization, or disclosure. I want to expand that definition a little bit to include the idea of awakening to fresh possibilities and potentialities which can have a lasting effect on one's life. And as mentioned, for some, the effect can be immediate, can be overnight, but for many of us, it's a long process which we may not even notice when it begins. And I'm going to relate to you what happened to me and how my life was changed in an epiphany. I'm here to tell you about that, and hopefully this story will inspire you to realize your epiphany and to maximize its effect. Before I tell you the story of my life, of course I have to mention that even though it was through music, playing the saxophone, that my life was manifested in what I'm about to describe to you, I think it's a universal story. I think everybody has in their life something that they'll be able to identify with as I describe, a course of events, the way things are going, something that happened in your life that's universal. So let's look at it as beyond just my story, but as something that's commonplace to all of us. Let me tell you my story shortly and briefly. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, 1946. You could say I was the beginning of the baby boomer generation. My parents were educators in the New York City Board of Education, eventually administrators, and my brother even went into teaching. In a Jewish family, middle-class Jewish family, in that milieu, there were two things that were quite important. One was an education. It was mandatory that you had an education. You were expected to go to college. That wasn't necessarily true in those days, as it is now. And an appreciation of culture. Not for you to end up being a musician necessarily, but to understand music, art, literature, politics, and so forth. My father would read the New York Times from cover to cover, and he expected me to do that also. There was also in my life a pivotal event, which was having polio. The last epidemic was in 1949. Of course, the Salk and Sabin vaccines came in the early 50s finally. But I was struck in 1949, and the effect of that, of course, is lifelong, as you see when I walk. But there was another effect that I'd like to bring up in relation to this story about my epiphany. And it has to do with seeing the doctor and my mother's reaction. It appeared that at some point I would have the magic operation that would allow me to not have to wear braces. It had to do with maturity of your bones, and I guess by the time you were 13, 14 years old, this could happen. So every time we went to the doctor when we got nearer to that age, there was always this apprehension and kind of nervous tension that I could feel in the car with my mother, especially about what's he going to say today? Could this mean that you could finally have this operation? And of course, when Dr. Diva or Dr. whoever walked into the room, it was like God approaching. I mean, this was the man. What he was about to say was to determine my life. Now remember, I'm a kid. I don't realize how momentous this is, but of course for my parents it was. And I think it was there that I got the image that the most respected person on the planet is an orthopedic surgeon. And I got very interested in orthopedic surgery. In fact, I have a book, I found it somewhere, called Understanding Surgery. It was a little pocket book, and I read it from cover to cover, and I probably knew as much as some of my anesthesiologists about what was going into my body at that age, because I had several operations and broken legs during this, my youth. In any case, this was the way it appeared it was going. And music would be, because I should of course say, I started playing piano and saxophone by 9, 10, 11 years old, and started working, we say gigs, meaning on the weekends at 13, even 14 years old, I was already working bar mitzvahs and weddings and in an area upstate New York called the Catskill Mountains in the hotel district and so forth. And music was a hobby. It kind of separated me from everybody else in high school. I was like the musician and so forth. And it appeared that I would go on to being a doctor and with great encouragement, play on the weekends and help support the bills for medical college and so forth. This all seemed on paper to be the right thing. Of course, what was missing was the spiritual component, something personal that was me. I didn't know that, but on one Saturday night in February 1962, my epiphany happened. And it has to do with one of the masters of jazz. Some of you might be familiar with the name. His name was John Coltrane, saxophonist. And that night when I saw him, the first time I saw him, completely changed my life forever. First of all, let me explain the circumstances of going to a jazz club called Birdland at the age of 15 years old. I was invited by some of the older musicians in my high school who were in the dance band. And of course, I was by that time playing saxophone and taking part in musical activities in the school and so on. And that Christmas of 1961, when we were off from school, I'll never forget going to Birdland, sitting there and hearing a big band 15, 20 feet away from me, 18 guys playing their heart out. That was the Count Basie Orchestra, and didn't know much about jazz history at the time, but it really affected me and made a big impression on me. So a few months later, I took a young lady to Manhattan, and we went after a nice meal in an Italian restaurant, well-known Italian restaurant. We went to Birdland, and now I was a big expert, so I'm going to show her the ropes. Well, I didn't know who was playing there, and it was the Bill Evans Trio. If you're familiar with jazz, that was one of the great pianists of our music, and this John Coltrane Quintet. And we walked into the club, and it was a Saturday night, and it was noisy, and people socializing as they do on a Saturday evening. And Bill Evans played, and I didn't notice much. And then this John Coltrane Quintet came out and played. And all I can remember is, my first reaction was, that cannot be the same instrument that I have home in Brooklyn under my bed in its case. Because, of course, Coltrane played tenor saxophone primarily, and I played tenor. And I was just shocked at the technical aspect. It was the flash. You know, the first thing you see when you're young is that how somebody moves and the way their virtuosity and so forth. That was, of course, the first impression. But what I realized really happened to me that night was that my spiritual DNA was changed, or was affected, maybe for the first time, in a way that it never was before and never happened again like that. There was an honesty, an energy, a straightforwardness about this music and about the 5 gentlemen on the stage, the way they related to each other, and the way the music sounded. And I remember, I'm a beginner, I don't know much about what they're playing technically, but I could feel this message. It was an incredible evening. And of course, from then on, anytime I could see John Coltrane, and by the way, other jazz artists, as I got more familiar with the music, obviously I did that, and in New York City in that period, you could see a lot of jazz. What happened to me that night was that what was on paper looking like I was going to go ahead with being an orthopedic surgeon, with, you know, all seriousness, at that point, it got changed. Now, did it get changed overnight? You could say that, but basically the process had begun. I didn't know it, but when I thought back years later, and I mean even a decade or two later, and said, was there a night or was there something that made me take this path of being a jazz musician or purporting to be a jazz musician? It was seeing Coltrane the first time, and then, of course, reinforced by other occasions. Now, of course, that means that when you have an epiphany, as I mentioned earlier, you have to follow through with its implications. It doesn't just fall from the sky. You have to do something about it. And in this case, it was learning the music. It was understanding what was going on, getting better on my instrument, taking part in musical activities of New York City, jam sessions and so forth, and eventually positioning yourself in a way that means you're online, meaning that you are available to enter the field, to enter the work that's available in this music. For me, I got very lucky. I had a friend, bass player named Gene Perla, who was working with the drummer with John Coltrane. His name was Elvin Jones. And after John Coltrane passed away in 1967, Elvin went on to be a leader of his own. And Gene was working with him, and he invited me down to kind of audition for Elvin at a club in Manhattan, and I got the job. And this was, of course, a dream come true to be with Elvin Jones. I mean, I had watched him for all these times with Coltrane. Here I was on the bandstand with him and my friends. And then it even went further because I got, within the year or two after that, the opportunity to be part of the Miles Davis group. Now, I'm sure all of you at least are familiar with Miles Davis and know who he was. He's probably the most important jazz musician of the century. And to be his, we say, sideman, to be in his band was a great opportunity, learning experience, and it launched my career. So if there was an epiphany, it was the night that I saw the light when I heard John Coltrane for the first time. And that remained with me and still remains with me to this day. I can still hear it and see it in my mind's eye. Concerning the work that should be done to realize the epiphany. In my case, I went to New York University, got a degree in American history, unrelated to jazz, but at the same time was following my muse by taking part in activities in New York and playing jam sessions and asking questions and being around musicians and trying to better myself as best I could in the field. I was kind of living two lives at the same time. Again, as I said, that epiphany that happened when I saw Coltrane, it wasn't something that I was consciously aware of by this time yet. It was just something within me that I felt, and I trusted my intuition. An important aspect of doing the work is to demystify the information, to get past the wow factor, to be ready to say, I'm committed to doing what's necessary to be excellent in the field. It isn't just rain coming from the sky. It isn't just going to happen. I have to do my work, and I have to seek out mentors, knowledge, and people who are ahead of me online and who can show me something if they're available and if they're willing to do that. You know, information, knowledge just enhances the creative impulse. We talk about somebody like Albert Einstein, who one day seemingly woke up with E equals MC2, but of course that wasn't enough. The implications he had to spell out and to be able to show the world. Somebody like Steve Jobs, who obviously saw the power of the computer at such an early stage and how it could change and alter how we live. And this is something that's a vision. Now, is it a full-blown epiphany or not? This is really a matter of semantics. It means that something drives you, something connects with you that makes you just go that extra mile and stay in it and stay with it, even though it might change in circumstances. For example, the classic do-gooder. Somebody decides they really want to help in the third world or with people that need assistance, and they go to a country like that and they end up realizing that it's not that easy to do. Now they have to learn how to be political and how to get favors and how to do what you have to do to bring the supplies in and so forth. You can't be sure how the path's going to go. I had something interesting happen to me, which was a kind of an offshoot of the epiphany. There was a period in my life when I was about 35 years old when I felt that playing jazz, by then I was accomplished. Playing jazz was not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I felt there was something in me that could do more for the world. So something more universal beyond just playing and enjoying the music, which of course I did. And I took some steps to become a lawyer. Believe it or not, I took the law's LSAT, got into a couple of the schools, and even thought about joining the Peace Corps, Save the Children, something like that. I mean, I got quite interested in all these things and pursued them and found out about them. Of course, the end result is that in a third world country, they don't need somebody playing saxophone. They need somebody to help them with agriculture and with water supplies and so forth. But what it did do was lead me to organizing a worldwide association that I'm very proud of, called the International Association of Schools of Jazz. And this is an association, a network of schools from 40 countries that has been going on since 1989. And when I see students in our yearly meeting coming from 20 to 30 countries meeting together, exchanging, getting past cultural barriers, I feel like I did something really important, and it satisfies that need in me. So you don't know where the epiphany is going to take you. You can't be sure. You have to trust, and you have to just let it affect your inner core and let it do its job, because it will lead you to where you should be if you just trust yourself. No agenda, try not to judge, just have an openness and a flexibility and be able to say, let's see what's going to happen from here on in. Before I close up, I want to underscore something that's essential to this discussion that I've been alluding to, and that is the power of the art. the power of the sound, in my case, of when I heard John Coltrane's group, and subsequently as I heard that group and other groups in the music, what became apparent to me was that this is not something you can touch, or that's mechanical, or that's something that's, tangible. It has to do with something beyond the pale. I didn't know that. I was brought up in a very, what you see is what you get. We say nuts and bolts, and that was the way my life was going. But when I heard this music and what it did to me, it propelled me on to what I'm doing now and how I've lived my life for the last 40 to 50 years. It was, yes, because I was open to it, of course, but it was the immense knowledge and honesty and reservoir of deep spirituality that I felt in the music. And that component is what propelled me. I hope that this talk has maybe made you reconsider, or can lead you to reconsider and re-examine the epiphany that happened to you, where it led you, and how you can maximize its potentiality. And for those of you who may say, well, I don't know about an epiphany, I'm not sure if I've had one or can have one, maybe my talk can help towards an epiphany of yours. I'd like to conclude with an improvisation. Jazz musicians live off of improvisation. That's what we pride ourselves in. That's our area of expertise. And for you, I would hope that the improvisational spirit, the openness to change and flexibility inherent in improvisation will help you towards discovering your inner self. Thank you very much for your attention.